When you stood up on that stage at the Guildhall, you said that you were the first black woman to win the Booker Prize, and in fact the first black British author to win.
Yes.
So you have joined this sort of panoply of women who are now sort of there as a sort of a marker for others. Do you feel like that? And what does that feel like?
I don't know what I feel at the moment, because I'm just still in a state of being overwhelmed by everything. And then every so often I think, oh my God, you did it. You won the Booker Prize, you know, and then I have to get on with kind of more publicity stuff. But I did say that, and I'm really glad I said that, because people don't know. You know, most people didn't know that we'd never won it. Mm-hmm. So they need to know that somebody has. I remember when Toni Morrison died, people would say she was the first black woman to win the Nobel Prize. No, she was the only black woman to win the Nobel Prize, and that was nearly 30 years ago.
Right.
You know, so until we get the kind of statistics and the numbers, you never quite know what the reality is for, say, you know, certain kind of marginalised communities. So the book kind of grew organically. The desire was to write as many of these women as possible, and in the end I came up with 12 of them. But I didn't know at the start how many characters there were going to be. And I think in the editing process, I always forget my process, but I think in the editing process, I had the 12 women together, and then I grouped them into groups of threes at some point, because that seemed to make sense. And characters emerged out of other character stories. So Amma is the theatre director who ends up having a show at the National Theatre after nearly 40 years. So she has this big breakthrough moment. And Yaz is her daughter. So Yaz had her own sections. Dominique is somebody she set a theatre company up with in the 80s. So she had a section. Carol is a banker, working class Nigerian, ends up going to Oxford, joins the corporate world. Her mother was in her section. Bumi, who's a Nigerian immigrant, so then Bumi had her own section. So it kind of grew like that.
They have male fears, which is they feel besieged. They feel that when women are loose, anything can happen. If you can't control the race, if you can't levy taxes, you can't decide who is legitimate and who is not. You can't decide to whom the children belong, and you can't tell the women what to do, then you have no authority for these men who are 50s men. They fought in the wars.
They came back.
They're representative of men at that time.
Right.
That's exactly.
Came back after World War II.
That's right.
And they've watched what's happened in the 60s. And they've watched the children
They're
change.
horrified.
And they're horrified by change.
Horrified.
Because they're in isolation.
They're in isolation, and they're not so different from a lot of African-American people in the late 50s and 60s. You know, nowadays, everybody loved Martin Luther King Jr. Everybody was involved passionately in the civil rights. It's like everybody in France was in the resistance. But at the time, there were
History
difficulties.
tells different.
Yes, there were people who were worried about stirring up things. There were people who had made peace. There were people who knew their strategies worked, and they didn't want anything that different. And these people represent that element of African-American communities that were very wary of change, of aggressive change, nonviolent though it may be. It really was penetration into the dime stores and the buses and insisting on rights overnight and getting oneself hurt. So these people represent that section of the community.
Mm-hmm.
The White Tiger is at its heart, I think, the story of a man's quest for freedom. I mean, that's always been for me the very essence of the book. It happens to be set in a social and a political context, but what it really is a man trying to understand, without any help from his background, without any help from his family, being put in an entirely new world, and having to understand for himself that this is a trap, and how he's going to break out of this trap. So it's a search for freedom at its heart. India, you know, is a country that's emerging rapidly in many ways onto the global scene. It seems to be a link between an ancient civilization and a modern economy in many ways, because it it has its religious past and its cultural traditions, but it also has a big outsourcing industry and modern industries. So it seems to capture both where a lot of the world has been and where it's going.
Ordinary People is about the lives of two London couples over the course of 1 year, this year being the year in which Barack Obama was first elected president and in which Michael Jackson died. And it deals with the relationship problems that the two couples are having, particularly in relation to dealing with a new baby and the death of a parent. And it's about how their lives become entangled over the course of this 1 year.
I don't have any sisters and brothers, and I'm alone in the house. So I have 3 things to help me: the cat, and the books, and the music. So still now, music helps me to write. To write is a very, it's a very solitude, You have to work alone when you're writing. So I need some things to help me to keep on writing. So music is one of them. I love any kind of music, jazz or rock, contemporary music or classical music, any good music. But I don't listen to music when I'm writing because I concentrate on writing. But when I'm not writing, I'm listening to so many kind of musics.
Historically, there's been a great divide between the different types of writing traditions in the Philippines. We have those writing in English, who tend to have a readership abroad, and those writing in Tagalog, or one of the many dialects and languages at home, who have a readership at home. And there's this divide, and they don't help each other. And we're such a bilingual or multilingual culture. I've never understood why those writing in English don't translate the native dialects and languages for the rest of the world, and the indigenous writers in indigenous tongues translate those in English for the rest of the tens of millions of Filipinos. So it's a real, it bothers me. Obviously, I'm very passionate about this. It really bothers me because rather than work together for literature, we'd rather bicker and make excuses. So it will be published in Tagalog.
Never Let Me Go was classified as science fiction. This book, The Buried Giant, is being, I guess if I went to a store, it would be sold under fantasy. Do you like those labels, or do you find them limiting? Where do you come in on this?
I don't particularly like labels. And I don't like labels as a reader, and I don't like labels as a writer. And when I'm writing, I don't try to think of these labels at all. And in fact, perhaps naively, I didn't think of the fantasy label at all. When I was writing The Buried Giant, because I'm like somebody just trying to make something. I'm like one of those guys before aeroplanes were invented, properly, who trying to make a flying machine in my backyard, and I'm just kind of doing my best. I have no prototype, and it might look really strange. I don't quite know what it would look like at the end. I just need it to fly, and at the end, I make something I think it more or less flies, and someone looking at it will say, "Oh, that looks really strange. That looks like a flying dinosaur. That looks like that looks like a boat with wings or something." But I don't really see it as that. I've been kind of desperately trying to get this machine to fly, and it's only after the fact that people say, "Oh, is this a sci-fi book? Is this a fantasy book?" Yes, I've got those elements in it, but I like the idea that writers should be able to use anything they want, without prejudice from readers or kind of
or genreists.
Yeah, genreists. Yeah, I don't like any kind of imagination police looking over my shoulder when I'm writing, and I don't like imagination police when I'm reading. I want to.
Going in when the firefighters left was like standing on a black beach, with the sea suspended in its walls. soot suds like a conglomerate of flies. You kick the weeds and try to piece it back. Fractured shell, a bone, bloated antennae, flesh, thigh, spindle, gangrenous pet fish, an eye or a tiny glaring stone, a seal's tongue, or the sour sinew yoking front and hind fin, vertebrae or fetters, bedsheet or slave skin. The black is coming in from the cold, rolling up the beach walls looking for light. It will enter you if you stand there and spend the rest of its time inside you asking what it was, what it was, what it was, in a vivid hiss, heard only by your bones.
So my novel is about two sisters. Korede is the elder sister and Ayla is the younger one. And Ayla has the unfortunate habit that she kills off her boyfriends. And Korede, the elder sister and the responsible sister, is forced to clean up after her younger, to literally clean up by, getting rid of the blood and all of the evidence. So she has to clean up after Ayla's messes.
What made you decide to write a crime thriller?
At the time, I didn't think I was writing a crime thriller. I didn't really think much about genre. All I knew going into it was that I was going to be writing something that was about a woman killing men, and it was going to explore the relationship between the two female characters, and also was going to engage in this in what I've always kind of been interested in, which is how society responds and interacts with beauty and beautiful people.
Rainbow Milk is it pulls together three narratives, starting in the West Midlands in the 1950s. It was very important to me to try to reclaim something of my grandparents' generation's story. So Norman is in his early 30s, he has two young children and a wife. But he is beset by illness and experiences unexpected racism on coming to live in the UK, and is sort of throwing everything up in the air and sort of questioning his masculinity, etc. He then passes the baton on to a 19-year-old black teenager in the West Midlands, who has decided to leave his family and religious community behind to move to London. And so we watch him sort of make all of these quite bizarre decisions, but fortunately we see him grow older. We follow him to his mid-30s, where he is appraising his life as a black British person living in England just after it's voted to leave the European Union.
About 3.5 years ago now, I wrote a post on my blog called Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. I wrote it at a point of extreme frustration and despair, frankly, after a few years of attempting to try and talk to white people about race and just really getting nowhere. I was frankly bashing my head against a brick wall. I wasn't getting anywhere, and I was emotionally exhausted. But when I tried to talk to them about race and racism, it was just like a threshold that was absolutely, I was not allowed to talk about it. I found myself being called the real racist. I was told that I was silencing white people. I became the problem. So I wrote the blog post and I said that I can't have a conversation with people about the nuances of a problem if they don't even recognize that the problem exists. So I just pressed publish, left it at that. And then when I returned to my website, I could see it had really taken on a life of its own. It was being shared more times than I cared to count. And it was really strongly resonating with people in a way that I couldn't even begin to predict. And the response was also overwhelmingly positive. People saying, you know what, Reni, what you've done is articulated exactly how I feel. I've been trying to have this conversation for a decade. I've been trying to have this conversation for 30 years, et cetera, et cetera. And then there were also people who were saying, You've completely changed my perspective on this issue. Thank you so much.